Here's everything you need to know about the fifth house within your natal chart. And make sure you stick around until the end of this video where I'll be sharing with you more tips and tricks that you can use to get a deeper understanding of the houses within your natal horoscope. The traditional name of the fifth house is the Bona Fortuna, or the good fortune. The fifth house is a house of children as well as pleasure. The fifth house also represents our relationship to art, creativity, and things that we do just because we love them, not necessarily because our lives depend on them. Interestingly, the fifth house also has a lot to do with sports. One of the things I've often found about the fifth house is that very often when people are athletic, they usually have a very prominent fifth house within their natal charts. Which is interesting because the fifth house is traditionally also the house of gambling. And what better thing to gamble on than sports? The ancients considered the fifth house to be the house of taverns and entertainment and feasting and pleasure. And one of the things we find being said about the fifth house in the Renaissance is that the fifth house is also the house of love toys. Now, your guess is as good as mine as to what love toys are, but I have a few ideas. Since the fifth house is the second house from the fourth house, the fifth house also has to do with the wealth of our father and his relationship to money in general. However, the fifth house primarily has to do with children and offspring, and usually within a woman's chart, the fifth house has to do with her ability to conceive, as well as where she falls on the spectrum of fertility to begin with. As a succedent house, planets in the fifth house technically have 50% power to show their stuff. However, since the fifth house has a trine relationship to the ascendant, planets in the fifth house are also considered to be blessed, and this may elevate their ability to express themselves within our lives. The fifth house is the terrestrial joy of Venus, and Venus in the fifth house can be a very auspicious indicator for our ability to have children, but Venus in the fifth house can also represent us excelling at artistic endeavors in general. The fifth house is doubly Venusian because on the Chaldean order of Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon, Venus is the fifth planet, therefore corresponding with the fifth house, which amplifies the fact that our fifth house usually represents a place within our lives where we have a lot of fun and where we do things that we fundamentally enjoy. Despite popular belief, from a traditional astrological perspective, the fifth house has nothing to do with our romantic relationships, whether those relationships are casual or serious, and in traditional astrology, all of our romantic relationships can be found in the seventh house, which is the house of marriage, as well as all the romantic flings that we might encounter along the way. Within the physical body, the fifth house is corresponding with the heart, that very vital organ that gives our entire lives a greater sense of meaning. And I think this is really important on a symbolic level because the fifth house represents all the things within our lives that gives us a greater sense of value and a greater sense of quality of living, even if it doesn't increase the quantity of things that we have. To receive a free sample chapter of my book, Mastering Traditional Astrology, set to be published in spring 2023, sign up for my newsletter down below where you'll also gain access to other giveaways as well as free lectures from my private masterclass series. If you've enjoyed this video on the fifth house, then you're definitely going to enjoy my video on the sixth house of sickness and slavery.